you. Relationships are critical in Washington. But how do you A, find out who the key players are, and B, figure out how to reach out to them? Well, I want to tell you about Leadership Connect. It's been an absolute lifesaver for us as we expand our operations and outreach here at WashingTECH. Leadership Connect, it's the digital service used by top federal contractors and government affairs leaders to contact decision makers and develop those strategic relationships. Visit leadershipconnect.io and join the community. I love it, and I'm 100% sure you will too. That's leadershipconnect.io. Try it now.
We need to actually be resilient as a nation. We need to focus on building our social insurance and safety net systems so that our populations can be truly taken care of, and we won't see the kinds of broken systems and people falling through huge cracks like we're doing now.
Welcome to the WashingTECH Tech Policy Podcast.
The latest tech law and policy news and brightest tech law and policy experts wherever you are.
So you can stay informed, on the move, in less time.
From Washington, D.C., it's the WashingTECH Tech Policy Podcast.
With Joe Miller.
Joe Miller.
The state of New York reports a sharp uptick in domestic violence calls. Senator Wyden and Congresswoman Eshoo introduced a bill to combat online sexual abuse of children. And Maya Rockeymoore Cummings is my guest on the show today. Hey everybody, calls to the state of New York's domestic violence hotline increased 30% in April, according to New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Abusers are using the pandemic to justify keeping their victims isolated and have intensified the nature of their abuse from psychological or financial to physical. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is open 24/7 and can be reached at 800-799-SAFE. That's 800-799-SAFE. It's 800-799-7233. 800-799-7233. If you can't call, you can also text LOVE IS to 22522. That's LOVEIS to 22522. Otherwise, you can log in to thehotline.org. That's thehotline.org. Senator Ron Wyden and California Representative Anna Eshoo introduced a bill on Wednesday to stop the alarming spread of child sexual abuse material online. The Invest in Child Safety Act aims to invest $5 billion to quadruple the number of FBI investigators focused on online child abuse and exploitation from 30 to 120, and expand the capacity of state and local governments to investigate and prosecute the offenders and counsel the victims of online child abuse. The money would also help fund the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, create a White House oversight office, and require tech companies to keep evidence of online abuse for at least 6 months instead of 3 months, which is the current requirement. This new effort comes amidst a broader effort by lawmakers to limit Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which indemnifies tech companies for hosting content posted by third parties. Invoking California Assembly Bill 5, which requires companies to treat workers as employees if they control how workers perform tasks or if the work is routine, California Attorney General Javier Becerra and a coalition of city officials sued Uber and Lyft for misclassifying their workers as independent contractors. The bill took effect on January 1st, but so far the companies have pushed back on compliance. The New York Times reports that Uber has even gone as far as saying they're not required to pay their drivers as employees because technology is its core business, not ride-sharing. The lawsuit also claims the company's non-compliance is harming other businesses who have begun implementing the law. Calling Amazon chicken shit, Tim Bray, yes, chicken shit, that's what he called them. A prominent senior engineer and VP at Amazon resigned in dismay in an open letter on his blog after the company fired employee organizers protesting the company's treatment of warehouse workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. The workers went on strike along with workers from Target, FedEx, Whole Foods, and Instacart to protest their employers' weak efforts to protect them from the virus. At Amazon specifically, at least 75 employees across half the company's 110 warehouses have fallen ill. Uber announced plans to lay off some 14% of its workforce, or 3,700 employees, as demand for ride-sharing has dropped during the coronavirus pandemic. Most of the layoffs will come from the comm ops and recruiting teams. An internal memo suggested that more layoffs may be looming to as much as 20% of the current workforce, according to the information. Airbnb has also announced plans to lay off approximately 25% of its workforce, or about 1,900 employees. Tumblr, founded in 2007, announced just the other day that it will remove all posts that violate its hate speech policy. Better late than never. Finally, Twitter dragged some so-called researchers at Harrisburg University in Pennsylvania after the university posted a link claiming they discovered a facial recognition method capable of detecting criminality with 80% accuracy and no racial bias. One of the researchers is a former NYPD police officer. The university pulled down the link. The paper will still be released, but it's doubtful to withstand scrutiny, since many say 80% accuracy isn't high enough for the technology to be considered bias-free. You can find links to all of these stories in the show notes. Stay with us.
WashingTECH, the inclusive voice of tech policy. Because America won't stand still for the same old insiders. WashingTECH, moving the needle.
My guest today is Dr. Maya Rockeymoore Cummings, President and CEO of Global Policy Solutions, a certified B Corp and mission-driven strategy firm. Previously, she served as the chair of the Maryland Democratic Party, vice president of research and programs at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, senior resident scholar at the National Urban League, chief of staff to former Congressman Charles Rangel, professional staff on the White House Ways and Means Committee, and as a CBCF Legislative Fellow in the office of former Congressman Melvin Watt, among other positions. The recipient of many awards, Dr. Rockeymoore includes among her awards the Aspen Institute Henry Crown Fellowship. She's announced to run for Congress in Maryland's 7th Congressional District in November 2019 to succeed her late husband, Congressman Elijah Cummings. Please welcome Maya Rockeymoore Cummings. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to celebrate the life and spirit of your late husband, the great Chairman Elijah Cummings.
Thank you so much. It's just amazing that he's gone. The fact of the matter is that his loss was not just a loss for me personally. It was a loss for the nation. He would have been horrified at what's happening in the nation right now.
And I was thinking about him the other day when I was walking around the neighborhood trying to imagine how he'd respond in this moment. First of all, I'm sure he would have been livid about the Trump administration's handling of the warning signs leading up to this, and by the asymmetry here when it comes to how this disease is affecting Black people in particular.
He would have especially been upset and outraged because of the impact it had in Baltimore and amongst African Americans, Latinos, and other vulnerable populations across the country in terms of the disproportionate number of cases, certainly the disproportionate of deaths. So, Elijah, God took him before he could see this, but he literally probably is rolling over in his grave right now.
Mm-hmm. And, when we look at the numbers, in Wisconsin, African Americans only make up 6% of the population, but, half the people who died from COVID-19 there were African American. In New York, Black people are more than twice as likely as white New Yorkers to die from COVID-19. In Maryland, some 53% of people, as you know, who have died from coronavirus have been Black, and Baltimore City in particular.
It's just terrible because, Baltimore City is 65% African American. Prince George's County, another African American enclave, is just disheartening. You can't turn on social media in the morning without seeing a mass memorial page of people whom you know, friends and family of friends. This is a tragedy of just tremendous proportions that we actually have to have a national response to. Unfortunately, we do not have the competent leadership to marshal a response worthy of the tragedy.
Tell us a little bit about Mr. Mfume's, the current congressman from the 7th District, what he's doing to handle the situation and what you feel needs to be done going forward.
Not clear. He hasn't put forward a plan. He hasn't, as far as I know, articulated any kind of strategy. or a list of priorities with regards to the pandemic. But what I would say is that we need a several-pronged strategy. I think that frontline workers, essential workers, need access to health care now. We have a lot of grocery store clerks, delivery truck drivers who have to work. They can't do anything but work. Who need to actually have health care coverage because they don't have it. And that means that we need to allow a Medicaid or Medicare buy-in on a sliding scale, free for those of very low income. And that needs to be done on an emergency basis for the foreseeable future. Beyond the $1,200 of paltry income assistance, we need to actually guarantee that for the next 6 months. We need to provide renter assistance and homeowners mortgage assistance that goes beyond just saying that they get a reprieve. We need to actually have a way for them to pay it back in a sustainable manner when the coronavirus lifts. Or to have grants and aid to people who cannot pay it back because they are extremely low income. And so, in terms of, food assistance, lifted restrictions on the SNAP program, otherwise known as food stamps, making sure that no household is left behind and no household goes hungry in this era. And frankly, Joe, I think that it's time that we actually implement a basic income. And yes, I said 6 months of income. I do think that this might be the ramp up that we need to focus on how we actually make sure that this is available year round, given not only what we know about the coronavirus and the possibility that it could take up to 2 years to disappear, but also what we know about technology and automation and the pressures it's putting on the labor market and on low-income workers especially.
That's a good segue into my next question, which is the role of technology here and the role of technology in healthcare. Has this pandemic affected the way you think about that issue?
Yes. So it's a two-edged sword, almost like every scenario, right, Joe? On the one hand, we know that big data is helping us to understand how people are reacting and interacting in this coronavirus era. Where, the tech companies have released aggregated data about, people's movements that could be useful to public health. At the same time, to the extent that healthcare companies, scientists are talking about using data and technology in order to discriminate potentially against those who might be vulnerable to coronavirus or actually have COVID-19 in terms of reopening the economy, using technology to determine who can get back into society and interact versus who won't be allowed into certain facilities, et cetera. That's all scary. I mean, to the extent that would actually result, given what we already know in terms of the disproportionate impact of this disease in the population, that it could result in a mass society, a mass surveillance society in which certain people's movements are limited and they're discriminated against, which would virtually be almost based on their income and their race, should be a non-starter.
Yeah, and I want to get to the surveillance issue because there's a lot about that going on in Baltimore in particular, but we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll hear more about that and more from the Honorable Maya Rockeymoore Cummings. Stay with us. So a federal judge last week approved a new aerial surveillance program in the city of Baltimore, saying it's justified by Baltimore's high crime rate. What's your perspective here, Maya, and especially in light of the not-so-great relationship between Baltimore police and African Americans? I'm referring, of course, to the 2016 Department of Justice report showing widespread constitutional violations in that city, and, of course, the charges that were dropped against the officers who arrested Freddie Gray, who died in their custody in 2015. Has the Baltimore City Police Department improved its policing in a way that justifies giving them even more surveillance power? And what kind of oversight do we need here?
The short answer is no, Joe. There was just an op-ed in the Baltimore Sun this last week saying that there is no level, the levels of trust between the Baltimore City Police Department and the people of the community remain broken. That a majority of people don't even want to call the police when they have trouble because they don't trust the police. That a majority of the people say that they don't trust the police and they wouldn't even ask the police officer for directions if that was the only person that they had and they needed assistance. So literally, there is no trust here. And the, just this last week, we've seen several incidents of, police officers actually engaging in unfortunate ways with community members, one walking through a public housing unit coughing, suggesting that he was trying to give coronavirus or COVID-19 to residents. And so we have a major systemic failure in the city of Baltimore when it comes to the BPD. And that is only compounded by the fact that they've just been given this historic power in terms of having this aerial plane flying over the city during the daylight hours, taking a massive number of photos of people's movements, leaving their front door. They can basically trace any individual they want, what they've done all day long, and certainly trace it back to who that person is. Now, the police, the commissioner here says it's not going to be that big of a deal. It's only a 6-month period to test whether or not this can be a crime-fighting tool, that they're going to only limit it to certain kinds of crime, the reviews to certain kinds of crimes to track down crimes like, carjackings and robberies, et cetera. And that it will not be, something that actually impinges upon the privacy of Baltimore City residents. But as you well know, the ACLU has taken issue with it. I don't support this. I never have. The ACLU has taken issue with it. They actually lost their initial complaint, and now they're going to appeal that decision of the courts to basically say it's a violation of Baltimore City residents' privacy. And so, we're going back and forth here. I frankly also don't trust the people who are funding it, the Arnolds, who are out of Houston. These folks have, they made their money off of Enron, and they walked away from Enron, where all of those people were, their retirement funds were collapsed, and they walked away wealthy. They have since used their money to actually, strip away the pension benefits of state and local and county government workers, leading a movement to try to move them into a market-based system instead of guaranteed pensions. They're trying to move them towards pensions that depend on the stock market. So literally, you have a multi-billionaire who's trying to set policy here in Baltimore City, and it doesn't smell right.
Yeah, and this is a trend because we saw reports last week about Damian Patton, who's the CEO of Banjo, which is a startup firm that's created a real-time surveillance app that he's been marketing to law enforcement agencies. But it turns out that when he was 17 years old, according to the New York Post, he was behind the wheel of a car as his passenger shot up the outside of the West End Synagogue in Nashville, Tennessee. This was back in 1990. And the CEO, Damian Patton, he testified at trial, quote, "We believe that the blacks and the Jews are taking over America, and it's our job to take America back for the white race," end quote. This is what this CEO testified. So the latest reports say that he has suspended his contracts with these states. I suppose waiting until it dies down, but he doesn't need to be engaging with state law enforcement officials at all. Those contracts should be canceled. But turning to access, what are the access issues you're seeing during this pandemic?
Wow. I mean, they span from education to healthcare to housing. I mean, literally. And then, of course, just basic affordability issues given the disproportionate number of people who are now unemployed. So on the education front, just as soon as the governor made the decision to enact social distancing policies, The schools are closed down, but Baltimore City, has a disproportionate number of students who live in poverty, abject poverty, and so that meant that they did not have access to technology at home, whether that be Wi-Fi, internet access, or whether that be computers or tablets that they could even use from home to actually do their coursework. And so what you had here is a situation where teachers were going to places like supermarkets and encouraging parents through the news media to go pick up the packets for their kids so that their kids could learn with paper and pen on the home front. Guess how well that worked, Joe?
Yeah.
Not very.
Yeah.
On the housing front, and by the way, the city councils recognize this as a problem. They've just passed a historic bill dedicating resources towards purchasing tablets and Wi-Fi access for these desperate households. Housing, we've got, a huge number of certainly homeless here. Unlike other cities that have turned to hotels to house the homeless. We have yet to do that here in Baltimore City. In terms of healthcare, as you well know, African Americans, especially since this is a city that's disproportionately African American, have been traditionally, and now Latinos as well, high numbers without access to healthcare. That continues to be a problem, especially since African Americans and Latinos are disproportionately essential workers. They need access and they don't have it. And so unfortunately, the last piece I'll mention is the hospitality industry, which was disproportionately Black and brown, has largely shut down. And that means that, we're talking about affordability issues across the board with people who have lost income. And get this, can't even seem to access unemployment benefits because the state had been in the process of limiting the number of people who could actually apply for unemployment, and a contractor that they've actually hired in order to facilitate these applications have been non-performing. And so literally we have people, I've been calling around to seniors' households, and we've got people who they applied 6 weeks ago and still have not received any unemployment benefits. There's a huge backlog.
A lot of things coming to light here, and states are opening up, and we can see now that it's premature. As soon as they find out that these things are affecting Black people in particular, that's when they start opening up, which is another sad thing and really vicious thing that a lot of these governors and states are doing, despite the consequences that they're having. Really an insensitivity and cruelty that we've seen over the last several weeks, and revealing these disparities. So in November, we have a huge decision to make for sure. What are some final ideas you'd like to leave with us before we close, and where can we find you online?
It's just really sad that we're in the state that we're in. But this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to recognize that equity needs to be at the heart of everything that we're doing. That we need to be focused on making sure that we're building systems that will stand the test of time, because no one thinks that this novel coronavirus, is going to be the last that we're going to see of really incredible diseases, especially given global warming and what it's doing to the nature of changing climate and the unleashing of new diseases that we're likely to see in the future. So that means that we need to actually be resilient as a nation. We need to focus on building our social insurance and safety net systems so that our populations can be truly taken care of, and we won't see the kinds of broken systems and people falling through huge cracks like we're doing now. I want to give a special shout out, especially to healthcare workers. My sister is a physician, but there are a lot of non-physicians and nurses and, administrators at hospitals who are doing yeoman's work, and people on the front line who are still going to work every day because they want to make sure that people have access to food and services. And so we've just got to give it up to them because they are the real heroes in all of this. And they're losing their lives disproportionately. And so, we really need to be thinking about hazard pay for them, but also, to the extent that, a lot of these folks are low income and they're needing to bury their loved ones, even thinking about how we can make sure that there are burial expenses for them in this next stimulus. So, kudos to those who are serving, but a recognition that this is perilous and that they are on the front lines.
Maya Rockeymoore Cummings, President and CEO of Global Policy Solutions, a Washington, D.C. based policy firm, and future Congresswoman from Maryland's 7th Congressional District, where primaries are happening June 2nd. So definitely get out there. Maya, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. MayaForCongress.com. Thank you so much, Joe.
And that concludes episode 230 of the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. If you like what we do, we'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment, head over to Apple Podcasts, give it a review. It helps others know what they can expect from the show and really helps us out. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you back here next week. Take care.